The ticket was still folded. On a Tuesday morning in March of 2022, a man named Curtis Beauregard was cleaning out his late father's 1984 Ford LTD in a driveway in Bartlett, Tennessee, the kind of job that takes 3 hours and leaves you standing in the yard surrounded by 30 years of forgotten things. Gas receipts, an expired insurance card, a Rand McNally Road Atlas with Tennessee dog-eared, and at the very back of the glove box, tucked behind a flashlight that no longer worked, a torn bus ticket. Memphis Transit Authority. Route 16. The corner was stained with something that had dried brown decades ago. Curtis almost threw it away. He almost didn't read it. But something about the way it was folded, careful, deliberate, the way you fold something you intend to keep, made him stop. He held it up to the light coming through the carport. He turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that had faded but not disappeared, were 3 words and a name. He called the Memphis Police Department that afternoon. He wasn't sure it was anything. He said he just had a feeling. The detective who took that call would later say it was the strangest break she had ever seen in 22 years on the job. Because the bus ticket in Curtis Beauregard's hand turned out to be the last documented piece of evidence connecting Darlene Pickett to the night she vanished, and the name on the back of it had been sitting in that glove box since 1978. But before we get to what those 3 words said, and what they set in motion, we have to go back to Memphis. Because to understand what was finally given back to this family, you first have to understand who Darlene Pickett was. Memphis, in the summer of 1978, was a city still carrying weight it didn't know how to put down. 10 years had passed since April 4th, 1968, but in certain neighborhoods, in Orange Mound, in South Memphis, along the bus lines that ran through communities that had been deliberately cut off from everything else, that weight was still present in the way people moved through their days. The city had grieved, and it had rebuilt, and it had kept going, the way cities do. But the grief had settled into the foundations of things. And you could feel it if you knew where to look. Darlene Pickett knew where to look. She had grown up in Orange Mound, the daughter of Earline Pickett, a woman who had worked the laundry line at a hotel on Union Avenue for 23 years and never once called in sick. Darlene was the middle child of 3, the one people always described as the one who noticed things. She noticed when a neighbor's lights stayed off too long. She noticed when one of the women at Solid Rock Baptist hadn't come to choir practice and nobody else had said anything. She had a way of walking into a room and knowing within 5 minutes who was holding something they couldn't put into words. She was 27 years old in August of 1978. She worked the morning shift at Meridian Uniform Company on South 3rd Street, feeding fabric through an industrial sewing machine for 8 hours a day. And she was good at it, fast and precise, the kind of worker a floor supervisor doesn't have to watch. She sang soprano in the gospel choir at Solid Rock Baptist every Sunday, a voice that the choir director, a meticulous woman named Sister Odette Marsh, would later describe as the kind of voice that made the whole row around her sound better. She was saving money in a coffee can under her kitchen sink. She had been saving for 14 months. The goal was enough for first month, last month, and deposit on a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood 3 miles west, somewhere she could bring her mother so Earline didn't have to take 2 buses to the hotel anymore. She had written the number on a piece of paper taped to the inside of the cabinet door, $740. In August of 1978, she had $580. She rode the Route 16 bus to work every morning. The stop was 2 blocks from her apartment on Wabash Avenue, and the bus came at 6:42 and again at 7:04. And Darlene always took the 6:42 because she didn't like to be rushed. On the evening of August 22, 1978, she left the factory at 4:30 in the afternoon, the way she always did, and she walked to the stop on South 3rd to catch the southbound Route 16 home. She never made it through her front door. Her mother reported her missing at 8 o'clock that evening. Erline Pickett had called twice and gotten no answer, and in August of 1978, you could not call a bus line to ask whether a specific passenger had ridden or not, and there was no way to trace a route, and the only thing you could do was call the police and hope they listened. The officer who took the call logged it as a possible runaway. Darlene was 27. He did not come to the apartment that night. Erline went herself. She walked to Darlene's building on Wabash, let herself in with the key her daughter had given her, and found the apartment exactly as Darlene had left it that morning. Dishes draining by the sink, the radio on low, a pot of dried beans soaking on the stove, the coffee can under the sink, the paper on the cabinet door with $580 written on it in Darlene's hand. Erline sat at the kitchen table until morning. Darlene's body was found 3 days later, on August 25th, by a maintenance worker in a drainage easement behind a warehouse complex near the rail yard south of downtown. She had been moved. The medical examiner's report, completed 2 weeks later, determined the cause of death to be homicidal violence. The time of death was consistent with the evening of August 22nd, within hours of when she had left the factory floor. Detective James Roby caught the case on a Thursday morning. He was 43 years old, a Memphis PD homicide detective with 16 years on the job, a man who had worked enough cases to know within the first hour which ones were going to be easy and which ones weren't going to be easy at all. This one, he knew before he reached the scene. The drainage easement had been exposed to rain. Physical evidence at the scene was limited. No witnesses to the initial incident had come forward. No one on the Route 16 line had reported seeing anything unusual on the evening of August 22nd. A canvass of Darlene's route from South 3rd to the bus stop produced nothing. What Roby had, in the first week, was very little. What he did have was this: a witness, a woman named Patricia Ware, who had been waiting at the South 3rd bus stop on the evening of August 22nd, and had seen Darlene board the northbound Route 16 at approximately 4:45 p.m. She had noticed Darlene specifically because of the uniform fabric she was carrying, a remnant from the factory, the kind of thing workers were allowed to take home. Patricia said Darlene boarded the bus. She said the doors closed. She said the bus pulled away. And then Patricia boarded the next bus and went home and didn't think anything of it until she saw Darlene's name in the paper. Roby tracked the Route 16 driver scheduled for that run. His name was Willard Estes. He was 31 years old, had driven for Memphis Transit Authority for 4 years, and had a clean record with the city. He was cooperative when Roby came to see him. Yes, he remembered the route that evening. Yes, he might have seen the woman, it was hard to say. He drove that route every day. He didn't recall anything unusual. He'd heard about the woman in the paper, and it was terrible. Just terrible. Roby noted in his file that Estes had no alibi for the period between the end of his shift at 6 p.m. and 9:00 that evening. He noted that Estes lived 7 blocks from the drainage easement where Darlene's body had been found. He noted all of this, and he kept Estes as a person of interest. What Roby couldn't do was connect the pieces. There was no physical evidence. Patricia Ware had seen Darlene board the bus. She had not seen Darlene leave it, or seen anyone approach her, or seen anything that constituted a witness account of a crime. The drainage easement had given up nothing useful, and Willard Estes, when pressed, remained calm, cooperative, and specifically unincriminating. By the winter of 1978, the investigation had slowed to a crawl. By the spring of 1979, it had effectively stopped. James Roby carried the file in his briefcase for 2 more years before it was transferred to a storage unit, where it stayed for decades, and then to a newly established archive, where it continued to stay while the world above it kept moving. Erline Pickett did not move on. That is the phrase people always use, and it was never true of her. She continued working the laundry line at the hotel on Union Avenue. She continued riding 2 buses to get there. She continued going to choir practice at Solid Rock Baptist on Wednesday evenings. Though she no longer sang, she sat in the 3rd pew and listened to the sopranos. And sometimes people would see her close her eyes, and nobody said anything because they understood. By 1985, 7 years had passed. Darlene's sister, Loretta, had married and moved to Nashville. Her brother Calvin was working construction in St. Louis. The apartment on Wabash Avenue had been rented twice and then emptied and then rented again. And whoever lived there now had no idea what had happened in the building. The coffee can was long gone. By 1995, James Roby had retired. He'd had a triple bypass in 1993, and his wife had made him promise to stop bringing the job home. He gave most of his files to his successor. He kept one. He kept it in a box in the spare room, and sometimes on a Sunday afternoon he would take it out and read it, not because he expected to find something new, but because he felt he owed it to someone to keep reading. Willard Estes had left Memphis Transit Authority in 1981. He'd moved to a suburb northeast of the city, then to a smaller town in Tipton County then, according to records that would eventually be pulled, back into the greater Memphis area, where he lived quietly and without particular incident for the next 4 decades. He got older. He had a condition that required medication. He drove a 1984 Ford LTD that he maintained with the care of a man who had once spent his working life behind a wheel. He died in January of 2022. His son, Curtis Beauregard, who had taken his mother's name after his parents separated in the 1980s, drove up from Cordova to clean out the house. And in March of that year, on a Tuesday morning in a driveway in Bartlett, Curtis Beauregard found something in a glove box that he couldn't throw away. The award poster that Darlene's family had circulated in 1978 was long gone. The neighborhood where she had lived had changed 3 times over. Erline Pickett, who had ridden 2 buses to the laundry line for 30 years and never once called in sick, had passed away in 2009. She had never gotten an answer. If you want us to keep telling stories like hers, cases that took decades and determination to finally close, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from. It means more than you know. Now let's get back to Darlene. Detective Cheryl Beaumont had been with the Memphis PD Cold Case Squad for 6 years when she caught the call from the front desk in March of 2022. A man had come in with a bus ticket he'd found in a dead man's car. He thought it might be connected to something old. She had heard versions of this before. She had learned, over 6 years, that sometimes they were nothing, and sometimes they were everything, and the only way to know was to look. She met Curtis Beauregard in the lobby. He handed her the ticket in a Ziploc bag he'd had the sense to use before he came in. She held it up under the fluorescent light. Memphis Transit Authority. Route 16. Date stamp, August 22, 1978. Torn at the top right corner, the way a driver tears a paper ticket to mark it as used. She turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that had spent 44 years in a glove box, in various stages of heat and cold, 3 words and a name. The words were, "She saw me." The name below them was Darlene. Beaumont set the bag down on the table. She looked at Curtis Beauregard. She asked him whose car it was. He told her. He told her his father's name. He told her that his father had driven the Route 16 bus line for Memphis Transit in the late 1970s. She excused herself for 3 minutes. She pulled the archived case file on Darlene Pickett. The system had been digitized in 2015, and the name was there, and she read the summary standing at the printer. James Roby's handwriting. The witness account, the person of interest, the name that had never been charged. Willard Estes. She went back to Curtis Beauregard, and she told him that she needed to keep the ticket, and that she would be in touch, and that he had done the right thing by coming in. The next morning, she drove to Tipton County to find James Roby. He was 87 years old, living in a small house outside Munford, with a vegetable garden and a tabby cat, and the kind of quiet that comes to men who have made their peace with most things, but not quite all of them. When Beaumont showed him the photograph of the ticket, she had photographed it before bagging it into evidence. He sat with it for a long time. He had the same careful stillness she had read in his case notes. He asked her to read him the 3 words on the back. "She saw me," he said, when she finished. He nodded once, slowly. That was always what I couldn't figure out. What she saw. What Darlene had seen, and what the investigative work of the next 4 months would assemble into a prosecutable record, was something that took place on the Route 16 bus on the evening of August 22, 1978. A passenger in the rear of the bus, a woman who had never come forward, had told a neighbor shortly before her own death in 2003 that she had witnessed Willard Estes and a young woman arguing near the front of the bus that evening. A brief, intense exchange that ended when Estes stopped the bus before its scheduled stop and told everyone to get off for a reroute. The woman had gotten off. Most passengers had. One apparently had not. The torn ticket was consistent with having been in Estes's possession since the day it was collected. Drivers sometimes kept torn tickets from passengers they wanted to remember. An informal record that had no official purpose. The specific nature of what he had written on the back, and the fact that it had been kept and hidden for 44 years rather than discarded, constituted a powerful consciousness of guilt. The forensic genealogy process Beaumont requested confirmed what the documents and witness accounts strongly implied. Trace biological material, recovered from Darlene Pickett's clothing during the original 1978 examination and preserved in the Shelby County Evidence Archive, was submitted to the State Crime Lab. The lab used current genealogy database technology, the same process by which family trees are traced on ancestry websites, to build a DNA profile and match it against a family network. The profile matched the family of Willard Estes at a level that excluded all other contributors. Willard Estes had been dead for 4 months. He would not face trial. The Shelby County District Attorney's Office held a press conference on August 22, 2022, the 44th anniversary of Darlene Pickett's disappearance, to formally announce that the case had been solved. The DA named Willard Estes as the perpetrator. She described the evidence. She noted that he had lived in the Memphis area for decades after the murder, had never been charged, and had died earlier that year without ever being confronted with what the evidence would show. Loretta Pickett, Darlene's sister, flew in from Nashville for the announcement. She was 71 years old. She sat in the front row of the press conference and did not say anything during the formal remarks. Afterward, when a reporter asked her how she felt, she was quiet for a moment. "My mama always said the truth would come out," she said finally. "She just didn't get to be here for it." Calvin Pickett, Darlene's brother, issued a statement from St. Louis. He thanked Detective Beaumont and James Roby and the people at the crime lab. He said his sister had been saving money to get their mother out of a neighborhood that was too far from everything. He said she had $580 in a coffee can when she died, and he had thought about that number for 44 years. James Roby attended the press conference. He wore a dark blue suit that had been pressed carefully, and shoes that had been polished. He sat near the back. When it was over, he shook Cheryl Beaumont's hand for a long time without saying much. And then he went back to his house in Munford and his vegetable garden and his tabby cat. Curtis Beauregard did not attend. He had called the tip line a second time after the press conference to say he was glad he hadn't thrown the ticket away. He said he had been thinking about it for months. He said he didn't know how to feel about who his father had been. He said he thought Darlene's family deserved to know that not everybody in that family had chosen silence. Darlene Pickett was 27 years old. She sang soprano in a gospel choir and worked a sewing machine with the kind of precision that made other people's work look better by comparison. She noticed when someone in a room was holding something they couldn't say out loud. She had $580 in a coffee can under her kitchen sink and a paper on the cabinet door with a number written in her own careful hand. And she was 14 months into saving her mother out of a life that was too hard and too far from everything. She rode the Route 16 bus every morning at 6:42 because she didn't like to be rushed. What the case of Darlene Pickett ultimately required was a chain of things that almost didn't happen. A man who cleaned out his dead father's car instead of paying someone else to do it. A bus ticket that was almost thrown away with the gas receipts and the expired insurance card. A woman who had seen something in 1978 and never come forward, but had told one person before she died. And that person had been located. Evidence preserved in an archive for 44 years because someone in 1978 had put it in a box and sealed it and labeled it correctly. A cold case detective who had spent 6 years learning to take strange tips seriously. And a torn piece of paper with 3 words on the back, kept for reasons that only one man knew. Folded the way you fold something you intend to keep. There is no resolution in the legal sense. Willard Estes died before the case was completed, and the law does not allow posthumous trials, and the only formal outcome of 44 years of work is an official naming, a case file that now closes with a perpetrator identified rather than unknown. For Darlene's family, it may be that this is better than nothing, and also less than everything, simultaneously, the way most things are when justice comes this late. But her name is no longer attached to a question. After 46 years, there is an answer. And the answer has a name. I want to know what you think. When a perpetrator dies before being charged, does the naming still constitute justice? Is there something meaningful in the public record knowing the truth, even when no courtroom will ever hear it? And what does it say about the people who kept that evidence, who labeled that box, who preserved that clothing, that they could not have known whether it would ever matter, but they kept it anyway? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Justice found Darlene Pickett after 46 years. Her family waited a long time for someone to say her name in the right context. If you believe that truth is worth pursuing, no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. The description has more solved cold cases waiting. Thank you for being here.